few weeks ago, I started with the Far Side calendar, if you remember that, and how going through the book of Isaiah, sometimes just like you're looking ahead into the future, you're seeing what God's going to do. It's like cheating on that calendar. And I realized that I was able to look at the comics and you didn't, so I picked out a few of my favorite comics from this week's Far Side calendar I want to share with you. Unrelated to the sermon, this is just a little moment to catch you, but let's go ahead and put that first slide up there. Can we read? Let's see, what does that say? Returning from vacation, Roy and Barbara find their friends, in fact, all of Atlantis, just plain gone. So that was a favorite of mine this week. Next slide, please. I remember this one from when I was a kid. This one's so good. Hello, Emily. This is Gladys Murphy up the street. Fine, thanks. Say, could you go to your window and describe what's in my front yard? I love the Far Side. Anyone else fans of the Far Side or just me? Okay, we got a lot. Next slide, please. Oh, what's that doing up there? I don't know how that got in there. But in case you missed, the Chiefs did win the Super Bowl. They are world champions. All right, next slide, please. Oh yeah, that's also a reminder that as a Chiefs fan, I am essentially a Super Bowl champion as well. That we get included in that. Look at Rachel's face. I wish my fist was just a little different placement there, but we were very excited. We blew the roof off. All right, next slide. I think this is the last one. Okay. After many years of marital bliss, tension enters the Kent household, and she's sewing stupid into the S there. So, all right. Like I said, nothing to do with the sermon, just a little laugh before we get started. Would you turn with me to Isaiah chapter 28? Isaiah chapter 28. We're going to look at this chapter. This is a chapter of contrasts in many ways. And before we jump into this, the reason why this is of value to us is because God is who He is. And He deals with people the same way He's always dealt with people. And we would be wise to look in the past and see how He has dealt with people before, people with treacherous hearts and people that had esteemed themselves as righteous and holy, and we would take warning how He dealt with people that were humble and righteous. We need to look at how God has treated people in the past to know what to expect and how He will treat us. His character remains unchanged. And in chapter 28, we see 4 points of contrast throughout this chapter. And the first one we see in these first 2 paragraphs. In verses 1 through 4, we see those verses stand in contrast to verse 5 and 6. So we're going to just kind of do a little running commentary of this chapter, and then we're going to land on what I think is really the most focal point, and the New Testament confirms that as well when we get to verse 16. But let's look at these points of contrast first. First of all, verses 1 through 4 contrasted to 5 and 6. Verses 1 through 4. Ah, the proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim, and the fading flower of its glorious beauty, which is on the head of the rich valley of those overcome with wine. Behold, the Lord has one who is mighty and strong, like a storm of hail, a destroying tempest, like a storm of mighty overflowing waters. He casts down to the earth with His hand. The proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim will be trodden underfoot, and the fading flower of its glorious beauty, which is on the head of the rich valley, will be like a first ripe fig before the summer. When someone sees it, he swallows it as soon as it is in hand. So he's describing Ephraim. And how does he describe Ephraim? And we must be wary that we aren't described the same way. They are proud. They view a crown upon their head. They're proud of what they have done. They're proud of their natural value. They are proud of their accomplishments. They're proud of their majority. Ephraim, you'll remember, you have the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And you have the 12 sons of Israel. But to each one wasn't allotted a tribe, because you have Ephraim was the son of Joseph. There's no tribe of Joseph, right? Ephraim was one of the sons of Joseph, and Manasseh was the other son of Joseph. Those are the tribes. Ephraim in 930 BC, led the northern 10 tribes in a successful revolt against the southern 2 tribes of Israel. It was the tribe of Judah in the south. And you know what the other tribe was in the south that remained? Benjamin. Remember, Benjamin's tribe, the lowliest of all the tribes. So you have this supermajority in the north that revolted, and you have just this remnant in the south. And this is part of now their heritage. This is part of their pride. We are powerful. We are beautiful. We have accomplishment. And we're the majority, so we must be right. And it's described as a fading beauty. It's described as a crown upon their drunken heads. But all this is in contrast to verse 5 and 6. And also, notice in verse 4, it says, you'll be like a first ripe fig. So all these things that you are proud of, God says, your strength, your accomplishment, your beauty, all that simply makes you ripe for the picking. And he says, I'm going to send someone even stronger than you. I'm going to send someone even more glorious than you, and they're going to judge you. And then verse 5 and 6. In that day, the day when Ephraim is humbled, in that day the Lord of hosts will be a crown of glory and a diadem. Diadem is another word for crown, of beauty to the remnant of his people, and a spirit of justice to him who sits in judgment, and strength to those who turn back the battle at the gate. And so here we have a contrast to the supermajority of the north and the remnant. It says you have this beauty that you think is your crown, this ability that you think is your crown, and what do you hang your hat on? What would you say? This is my greatest strength. And God says, don't put your pride in that. Don't put your glory in that. He says, this remnant that remains, this humble people that learn what I'm trying to teach them, I will be their crown. I will be their glory. And not only that, not only will I be their crown of glory, but to the judgers, those who issue judgment on others, like the north did, he says, I will issue them judgment. So the judgers become the judged. So that's the first contrast. Contrast of pride and humility. A contrast of glorying in your own accomplishments versus Christ, God, being your glory and your strength and your justice. But then we see a second point of contrast, comparing verses 7 through 10 with verses 11 through 13. He continues. Verse 7, these also reel with wine and stagger with strong drink. The priests and the prophet reel with strong drink. They are swallowed by wine. The imagery is really beautiful. They're not swallowing the wine is swallowing them. They stagger with strong drink. They reel in vision. They stumble in giving judgment. For all the tables are full of filthy vomit with no space left. Now, we don't know if drunkenness was genuinely the issue, the problem with Ephraim and with the leaders, or if this is giving a very descriptive picture of how inept they are in their leadership. I lean towards that second one. That drunkenness may have been a problem for them, but if so, he's using that as a picture of how inept their leadership is. He says, they stumble in giving judgment, like a drunk person stumbling around, bouncing off the walls, leaning around the corners. He says, this is your judgment. You're not of sound mind. You're supposed to be leaders of the people, and you sit at this table, and it's covered in vomit. So this is a condemnation on the leaders. He continues, verse 9, to whom will he teach knowledge, and to whom will he explain the message? Those who are weaned from the milk, those who are taken from the breast. So now what he's saying is, you leaders are not receiving instruction from my prophet Isaiah. My word is of no value to you. You're rejecting him, and in rejecting him, you're rejecting me, because you are so sure of yourselves that you don't need correction. And he says, so who am I going to speak to then? The infants, the babies, because you guys are too mature for this. You guys are too old for this. You don't need me, so I'm going to go to the next generation. He's kind of mocking them. And then most scholars believe that verse 10 is kind of an accusation from these leaders. It's an insult from the leaders about Isaiah's preaching. They basically were saying, Isaiah, your preaching it's the ABCs. We don't need it. It's insulting to us how simple your teaching is. We need something much more mature than that. And they describe Isaiah's preaching as precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. In fact, in the Hebrew, this could even be continuing the illustration of their drunkenness. Phonetically, this all sounds very similar in the Hebrew. So it's almost like they're mumbling and slurring and saying, this is how they value the teaching from the prophet, precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little. They're saying we don't value it. And then that's all contrasted against verses 11 through 13. So you have the leaders that are very full of themselves, that are despising God's prophetic word, who are erring in their leadership and mocking God's prophetic word. And then verse 11, for by a people of strange lips, with a foreign tongue, the Lord will speak to his people, to whom he has said, this is rest, give rest to the weary, and this is repose. Yet they would not hear. And the word of the Lord will be to them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little, that they may go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. So what God is saying here at verse 11, he's saying, you won't receive instruction from my prophet? Okay. You don't like the way that he speaks? All right. I'm going to teach you with someone that speaks a foreign language. He's talking about the Assyrians. Foreigners are going to come in. They're going to teach you. You don't want to learn the easy way? You're going to learn the hard way. How many of us have learned that lesson? We didn't learn the easy way, and God had to come in and teach us the hard way. God says, you don't like precept upon precept, line upon line? All right, I'm going to send in the Assyrians. They're going to be a nightmare to you. But they will teach you what you're failing to learn, and they will issue precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, but you will be broken, you will be snared, you will be taken. So, that's the second point of contrast. In their hubris, they basically invited the harsh judgment of God to teach them what they needed to learn. Then we have verses 14 through 15, contrasted against verses 17 through 22. In verses 14 through 15, they think they have the system beat. It says, therefore, hear the word of the Lord, you scoffers, you who rule this people in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have an agreement. When the overwhelming whip passes through, it will not come to pass, for we have made lies our refuge, and in falsehood we have taken shelter. So they thought they had the system beat. Isaiah was saying, listen, the foreigners are coming in, they're going to destroy us. And the leaders, they navigated their way around it. They manipulated the situation. Anyone else here, professional manipulators, when you see the harsh thing coming, I'm going to figure out a way around this. That's what the leaders did in Jerusalem and in Israel and in Ephraim. They went and they made a covenant with the enemy of their enemy, and they thought this would save us. They made a covenant with death. In Beth's testimony this morning, her testimony is kind of saying, I started out making a covenant with death. I thought if I just lived this way, then I would be good with God. That's a covenant with death. I'm not going to get the judgment that God has assured me because I'm going to live this way instead. And God says, when the judgment comes, I'm not going to honor that covenant. I'm going to honor my covenant. That's what he's saying to Israel here. That's what he said to each one of us when we first came to Christ. We had to reject whatever former covenant we made that we thought would get us through death or out of judgment. That's what God's talking about here. He says, you've made a covenant with death, but look at what it's contrasted against. In verse, let's pick it up in verse 18. Then your covenant with death will be annulled. Your agreement with Sheol will not stand. When the overwhelming scourge passes through, you will be beaten down by it. As often as it passes through, it will take you. For morning by morning it will pass through, by day and by night, And it will be sheer terror to understand the message. Again, he's going back. You're not listening to my prophet. You'll listen to the Assyrians as they prophetically tell you what I'm trying to tell you now. For the bed is too short to stretch oneself on, in verse 20. And the covering is too narrow to wrap oneself in. You're not going to find any comfort. You're not going to find any solace. Verse 21, for the Lord will rise up as on Mount Perazim and in the valley of Gibeon. He will be roused to do his deed. Strange is his deed. And to work his work. Alien is his work. To those that aren't listening, God is always a mystery to those that don't know him. Even to his children who don't listen to him and don't take the time to get to know him, his ways seem mysterious. Now therefore, verse 22, do not scoff, lest your bonds be made strong. For I have a decree of destruction from the Lord God of hosts against the whole land. So now again is that warning. And it's so important for us to take. In those times of discipline, God says, don't scoff. You got to receive it, lest the bonds become strong. The longer it takes you to learn the lesson, the longer you're going to be in this point of discipline, which is not comfortable. In the experience of discipline, it feels indistinguishable from punishment. God says, I want you to learn the lesson. Now, God is so good, he gives 2 points of comfort in this chapter as well. And the first one, well, technically the second point of comfort, he gives from verses 23 to the end of the chapter. Look at verse 23 to 26. Give ear and hear my voice. Give attention and hear my speech. Does he who plows for sowing plow continually? Does he continually open and harrow his ground? When he has leveled its surface, does he not scatter dill, sow cumin, and put in wheat in rows, and barley in its proper place, and emer as the border? For he is rightly instructed, his God teaches him. We've got farmers in the house here. Where are we at in the farming process right now? What's the farmer doing at this time of year? Preparing? What does that include? Maintenance on equipment. Purchasing the seed. Now, if we ask you in 6 months, if he says, yeah, we're purchasing seed, we're working on the equipment, and then 2 months after that, we say, what are you doing right now? He's like, we're purchasing even more seed. We're working on all the equipment. And then 2 months after that, hey, what are you doing right now? You wouldn't believe the state of my equipment. It's all great. It's wonderful. And what else did you do? We bought a lot of seed. That would be a problem, right? We would be like, maybe there's a reason you're losing money. God's saying, listen, there's a time to plow, but then there's a time to sow the seed. And he says to Israel, right now, in this point of discipline, I'm plowing, and it hurts. I'm breaking up the ground. But know that it's for a purpose, and it's not forever. What a good encouragement to us. The season we're in is not forever. God assures us of that in Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season, a time to sow, a time to reap, etc., etc., etc. The season you're in is not the season you will be in forever. Those of you that are in a season of suffering, that's encouragement. Those of you that are in a season of success, that's a warning. The season you're in is not the season you will be in forever. And God says, you may be receiving discipline right now. I'm plowing the ground, but it's so I can sow a seed. Some change is coming. That's a point of encouragement. He continues with this second point of encouragement in verse 27. He says, dill is not threshed with a threshing sledge, nor is a cartwheel rolled over cumin, but dill is beaten out with a stick and cumin with a rod. Does one crush grain for bread? Does he not thresh it? No, he does not. He does not thresh it forever. When he drives his cartwheel over it with horses, he does not crush it. This also comes from the Lord of hosts. He is wonderful in counsel and excellent in wisdom. So in the same way that he's saying the farmer has different seasons and you're not going to remain in the same season forever, he also says that the actions I'm taking for you now are specific for you. You don't prepare cumin the same way that you prepare wheat. You don't thresh one harvest the same way you thresh the other. There's a special technique for each and every one. And he says the actions I'm taking against you are specific for you. Different measures for different purposes. And you need to hear that this morning as well. What you're going through right now, whatever it is, positive, negative, stretching, trying, God has engineered it for you. Not for me, for you. And so we look at someone else's condition and we look at their life experiences and we don't have the full range of what they're experiencing, but we think we do and we're like, man, I wish I had that going on in my life. This is a word for you from the Lord. I don't treat all my children the same. Different people need different measures, and I'm giving you exactly what you need for your good right now. That's a point of comfort. But the first point of comfort that he gives is back in verse 16, and it's also the third contrast that we see in this passage. And this is where I want to land the remaining of my time with. We see it in verse 16. We read it this morning. Because you have made this covenant with death, God says, it's not going to last. You've made your enemy of your enemies your refuge, and you think that's going to help you. Therefore, verse 16, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am the one who has laid as a foundation in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a precious stone, a cornerstone of a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not be in haste. So this is interesting. This is quoted multiple times in the New Testament. This little phrase here, and another one back in chapter 8 and verses 11 through 15. I think we have a graphic of that, different references. Can we put that on the screen? So Isaiah 8, 11 through 15, we'll read that in a moment. This passage right here is quoted 3 times in the New Testament. Foundational for the church. They use these 2 passages as arguments that Christ is our foundation. Christ is our cornerstone. And he says, whoever believes in this cornerstone will not be in haste. He's contrasting this idea of frantic behavior with faith behavior. He's contrasting frantic behavior with faith behavior. The enemies were at the gates, and the leadership were frantic for rescue. So they went to the enemy of their enemy, the enemy of God, the people who despise God. They went to them for rescue. They thought they made a deal, but they were behaving frantically. Look back in chapter 8 and verses 11 through 15 if you would like to, and we see the same point is being made. In chapter 8 of Isaiah, verse 11, for the Lord spoke thus to me with his strong hand upon me, and warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, do not call conspiracy all that this people call conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. That's describing a frantic behavior. There's a lot of Christians today that are in frantic mode. They're certain the end is coming, and it's here already, and the U.S. government is all against us, and everything's going to be stripped away from us, and they're frantic. They're gathering their guns. They're doing everything they can. This is kind of the mentality that Israel is in, and God says, don't be like them. Don't call conspiracy everything that's conspiracy. Don't fear what everyone else fears. Let me be your dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor, verse 13, as holy. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread, and he will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense, and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many shall stumble on it. They shall fall and be broken. They shall be snared and taken. So that confirms what we're seeing here in chapter 28 and verse 16. And what we have here is the condition of Christ. How he deals with you depends on how you approach him. If you come to him for refuge, he will be your refuge. If you come to him to step over him, he's just a stepping stone. He'll become a stumbling stone. If he is just something that serves your purposes, he will be an offense to you, and he will take you down. And the call here is, whoever believes will not be in haste. The New Testament consistently translates that, whoever believes will not be put to shame. So the call here of action for us, coming to Christ, this cornerstone, is to believe, to exercise our faith, and in doing so, we will not be put to shame. So who exactly are we believing in? There's 4 words to describe Jesus Christ here. 4 words. And I hope you wrote down those passages, Romans 9:33, Romans 10:11, 1 Peter 2, verses 4 through 8, and read those on your own. We might cover a couple of these here in a minute. But all of that is interpreting what this really means for us. It's the New Testament, Holy Spirit guided writers teaching us what this passage is trying to tell us. That this cornerstone is Jesus Christ. And we must put our faith in him. We must not be frantic. We will not be shamed. But he is the one we put our faith in, and he is described as what? Look again in Isaiah 28, verse 16. He is a stone. First of all, he's a stone. There's 4 words that are going to describe this stone, but why is he called a stone? Throughout the Old Testament, God describes himself as a stone, a rock. And Christ is described as a rock. What does that mean? He's inalterable. He's strong. He's unyielding. He's unbreakable. This stone that that God has lays down, it's a stone not crafted by human hands. This is gathering from many different passages in the Old Testament describing how God depicts himself, how God depicts his Jesus. How did God first reveal himself? I am that I am. What did he mean by that? He means, listen, I am who I am. You got to come to me for who I am. I'm not going to change myself for who you want me to be. I'm not going to be the version of me that you most want me to be. I am who I am. I'm unyielding. I'm unbreaking. I'm immutable. You come to me. I'm a rock. And Jesus, being laid as the foundation, is the rock. And what kind of rock is he? Tested. He's a stone. He's a tested stone. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16 describe this testedness that Jesus is, and it means something to us. In Hebrews, if I could turn there, I think we have, Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. I want to read the greater passage here. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Because Jesus Christ is tested and proven, by implication, not only is he tested, but he's proven. He's a stone that has been tested and proven. Because of that, he can sympathize with us as we are tested. And particularly, he has compassion on us when we're tested and we fail. Every parent here knows exactly what this is like. You see your kids going through something that they've never experienced before, but you've experienced it maybe 10 times, maybe 5 times. They're shunned by someone that they have a crush on. The boyfriend or girlfriend breaks up with them, and the hurt is so severe. They think their heart will never mend. But you've been there. You know it gets better, and you sympathize with them. You come alongside them. That is Jesus in our temptations and in our sin. He comes alongside of us. He says, listen, I've been there. I've been in the heat of battle, and I came through it, and you can too. So he sympathizes with us, and he dishes mercy. That's the best part. He doesn't say, listen, buck up, kiddo. I did it. No, you do it too. No. He says, you failed. Let me give you mercy. We need to hear that. That's a point of comfort for us. He's tested, so he sympathizes. He dishes mercy on us. But also, what is our response to this tested stone? We gain confidence because we know, hey, he's been through this. This isn't foreign territory for me. My God, my Jesus has walked where I've walked. He's experienced this temptation, and he hasn't failed. And so I gain confidence. It says that in verse 16. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So we gain confidence, and we draw near, and we receive grace, and we receive mercy. Why? Because he is a tested stone. He's tested. He says, I've laid a foundation in Zion, a stone, a tested stone, a precious stone. He's tested, he's precious. I think of Romans 8:31, where it says, if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not with him graciously give us all things? What he's saying is here, I gave for you the most valuable thing that I can think of. The most valuable thing in existence, my son. I gave him for you. So what would I possibly withhold from you? I gave you the best that I have. That shows how much God thinks of Jesus. Jesus is a precious stone, first of all, precious to God, precious to the Father. I think back in Genesis, I think, is it 22, where Abraham is called to sacrifice his son. And it's the picture, we see the picture of God sacrificing Jesus on the cross. And God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, the one whom you love. He's amplifying the value of the son. And then in the New Testament we read, for God so loved the world that he gave his son, his only son, his only begotten son. Jesus is precious in God's sight, but he's also precious to us. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 7, we have quoted, so the honor is for you who believe. That's the ESV. It's talking about this cornerstone. He said, the honor is for you who believe. That word honor, some translate that he is precious to you who believe. The idea is the preciousness of this stone is for you who believe. Again, Christ behaves, his behavior is determined by how you approach him. And if you come to him in belief, he becomes precious to you, valuable to you. If you come to him in any other way, he becomes a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. But he is precious. He is tested. He's a cornerstone. That means he is not dispensable. Everything is built upon him. The cornerstone, that's the third one. Everything is built upon him. Everything leans on him. You take him out, the house won't stand. There's a lot of churches today that are trying to remove the offense of Jesus from the church, and their house won't stand, and your house won't either. If you try to be everything for everyone and just edit Christ and the things that are offensive about Christ to this world out of your life, your faith won't stand. Any part of your faith not directly connected to Jesus is of no value. Can I say that again? Any part of your faith that is not directly connected to Jesus is of no value, because he is the foundation. He is the cornerstone. On him our feet stand. Our house is built on him. Your faith is built on him. Any part of your faith that would be identical to any other faith, any part of there are some pastors that get up and they preach sermons that any good Muslim could preach as well. There's children's lessons that are being taught around the world right now in various forms of faith that are teaching things like, hey, don't be afraid at night when the light goes out. And they're teaching things that could be applicable to any faith system. We don't want that. Christ is our foundation. It has to lean on Christ. Your faith, the expression of your faith, has to be determined by Christ. Do you know him well? He'll be a mystery to you unless you study him out. Lean on him, pray on him, depend on him. And then the last word used to describe this stone. He's a stone. He's a tested stone, a precious stone, a cornerstone. He's a sure stone. With this, our worship team is going to come up. Again, the New Testament quote, whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. Of all the things that we have to be embarrassed about in life, Jesus is not one of them. Do you ever feel like me that, man, my life just seems to be a collection of apologies and mistakes, one after the other? I let this person down, and then I let them down, and then I let my wife down. Do you ever feel like that? You know what? That's part of being human. But what won't let us down is Jesus Christ. Whatever we lean on in Christ, that's not going to disappoint us. We need not, the church has a lot to apologize for. Jesus Christ is not one of them. He is sure. He is certain. He will not disappoint if you build your life on him.